any general, any armed man or woman who served in the armed forces around the world is at the end of the day a person, a man or woman of peace. But you don't win conflicts unless you strike at what we call the center of gravity within a country that is proposing to wipe you out.
This is retired Army Major General Mark McCarley. This is an excerpt from an interview that was conducted 8 days after the signing, the November 10th signing of the agreement, the Russia brokered agreement between Armenia and Azerbaijan. He has some exclusive insights. He's been to Artsakh and talked with the people who, well, in 2016, after the 5-day war, he went there and did an assessment and told them, he went he wasn't a paid military attaché or anything from the U.S. He was retired then. He went there, gave them his honest assessment, and he has some inside information of why things turned out the way they did. Again, I'm not a Pashinyan apologist. I just know there's political upheaval in Armenia right now because of the outcome of this. I think you should pass this video along to everyone who has an opinion about this. Oh, and subscribe to the channel. There's also some footage, some drone footage that will accompany this excerpt. The full interview, it's over an hour long, is on my other YouTube channel, Tales of Truth. Go there, subscribe there, share those videos. But so in accompanying this excerpt, you'll see some of the drone footage from the Azeri Defense Ministry. So this is important information. You can't ignore the facts on the ground. I'll let the Major General speak for himself.
My observations about the ability of the Armenian Artsakh forces to sustain combat over a long period of time. A lot of ways to look at the current campaign. Most importantly, you see confirmation of Clausewitz being sort of the philosopher for senior army officers or military officers around the world. And there's a phrase that we repeat, and that is that war is nothing but politics through another means. And this is a classic example of the application of armed force to achieve a political objective. You can hear Aliyev, the president of Azerbaijan, who said out of his view of things that grown out of frustration for almost 30 years since the conclusion of the conflict in 1994, we, the Azeris, have obtained absolutely nothing by way of a mediated solution facilitated by the Minsk group. So now we're going to take it up and we're going to use force, and we have had a long-term strategy. And I say this, it almost begs a question if in fact Azerbaijan had a long-term strategy to retake Nagorno-Karabakh and went through this rapid equipping to bring it up to 21st century capabilities in a couple of areas like electronics, cyber warfare, and drone warfare. Why that didn't ring a lot of alarms in Armenia. Those alarms being, there's no other reason for Azerbaijan to spend the money that it did over the last couple of years for military hardware, but for one thing. It'd be kind of humorous. Azerbaijan would never attack its neighbor, Russia. That would not happen, nor its other neighbor to the west, Turkey. It would never attack Turkey. That's its patron. So the Armenians, seeing this development and certainly the acquisition of some first-class hardware. Now I want to go backwards for just a second. The chief of intel in the intelligence of the Artsakh army, I was in his office, and what he showed me were photographs, real-time photographs of Israeli drones. Now this is 2016. Now they certainly were in no way as sophisticated as the advanced systems that were used by the Azeris in this conflict. But that should have been a red flag, because the chief of intelligence, and kudos to him, he brought it forth. And he said, look, these are one of those things, we can combat them now in April 3rd of 2016. But there was no really military reflection, at least as far as I can see, or at least a strategy or doctrine put forth by the Armenian army to combat what essentially became the leading weapon for the Azeris in this emerging conflict. So what you had is you have the Azeris who are taking advantage of multiple opportunities to attack its politics by another means, specifically warfare. And one of the bigger challenges is, of course, that the Azeris had to be, or at least at the outset, were on the defensive, meaning they're defending something. You know, those of us, there are a lot of schools of thought when you talk about armed conflict. I'm of the school that the best defense is an offense, meaning you strike. I'm going to have to tell you this too, since you're a scholar. This is the not only the mantra of American military strategists, and I'm one of them, but equally the Israelis, who believe that the best defense for that very small, challenged geographically nation is to attack, is to go out and go on the offensive. And the reason for that is that you put your enemy into a position where the enemy can be jeopardized. The enemy will lose something. Now, in this instance, you have the Azeris attacking the heroes of Artsakh, the lions of Artsakh, out there defending. But the net consequence of that is either they defend or they retreat. And some commentators have already called this not only the 44-day war, but this is at least the manner in which the Armenian Artsakh forces defended. This was very similar to trench warfare in the First World War. Now, I saw some clips, video clips recently, and these clips at altitude somewhere around 5,000, maybe 7,500 feet, basically give you a pretty clear definition of the trenches that the Armenian Artsakh soldiers dug. Now, these are classic defensive positions. They're very similar. It hasn't changed over the course of time. You've got sensors in the front, of course, to give early alerts, and you have much more lethal weaponry to defend your trenches, but it's trench warfare. And that means defense. And, you know, this is a historical conversation, but the moment that you get locked in your trenches, you have basically said, that's as far as I'm going to go, and you can never really hurt the enemy. So there's some huge conversation points when you begin to talk about potential strategies that might have or should have been entertained. When I say entertained, I'm not talking about having fun, should have been considered by the Armenian Chief of Staff, the Armenian Ministry of Defense, not my good friend Ohanian, he's retired. So we have the Artsakh, the soldiers, in these trenches. Now, lo and behold, because the Azeris, with the assistance of Turkey and Israel, outfitted their army, basically upgraded their warfighting capabilities through the acquisition of both electronic warfare systems and drones. And there's a term for this. It's the Turks, look at me, I'm beginning to call the Azeris Turks. Uh-oh, that's across the line. But the Azeris have adopted to modern times and in effect waged war, as I saw it, through long-range artillery and through drones. And as so many Artsakh Armenian soldiers have reported, it was death from above, not even a whistle. And at 10,000 feet, or what are called high altitude, long range drone systems. These drone systems have the ability to launch and release munitions at altitude. And I've seen multiple clips, all of which have been verified, where trench positions held by Artsakh Armenian soldiers were completely destroyed by drones. For the Azeris, this is wonderful because all you're committing to, and most of the time you can retrieve your drones, is you have expended absolutely nothing in terms of human power, human men and women on the front lines attacking. And yet the Artsakh soldier is entombed and was entombed in his or her own trench, blown up, never knew what was coming, indirect fire. And these drones were incredibly successful when you look at some of the most recent, not only body counts, but battle damage assessments of weapon systems that were taken out by the Azeris using drone warfare. It's just incredible. The losses were so significant. Not losses really in terms of ground campaign. Yes, there were some tank battles, but the tank battles were of limited significance. So why this 44-day war is significant. It's significant not only because real lives were sacrificed, it's significant because the aspirations of the Armenian people have been challenged. But equally, for those who study war as a science, this is an actual expression of the value of asymmetric warfare. Symmetric means that you have trench warfare with the Artsakh Armenian soldiers, and 1,000 meters away, you have a trench with the Azeri soldiers, and then they go after each other by crossing no man's land with or without tanks. That is like World War I, but that's symmetric. Everything's exactly the same. The Azeris with Israeli and Turkish weapon systems and Turkish advisors practiced and engaged in armed conflict in an entirely new way that was unanticipated. I'm going to say that 3 times, unanticipated by the Armenian generals. Even though, and this is why I retreat to my observations in 2016, the Artsakh chief of staff, and not chief, both the chief of staff and his 2-star major general intelligence chief reported that the Azeris were at that time using drones, much more less sophisticated than ones we have now. But it sort of did not ring that bell, turn on that red light to say, we've got to be able to meet this challenge of drone warfare head on. And then the other interesting part that will have to be assessed by scholars, military scholars over time is perhaps if it had been, if the Armenian Artsakh forces had obtained the necessary both drones, necessary ground systems that are now being developed by the Israelis, interestingly, and the US, and of course the Russians, that are anti-drone systems and maintain some of this, it might have been a game changer, or at least it might have altered the outcome. Now, the other, perhaps most controversial analysis, and I mean, this is extremely controversial, is I just raise it as a question, did the Armenian forces hamstring themselves by basically fighting like wars were fought in the First World War with trench warfare? There were some conversations amongst me and some others out here who are interested in these areas, and trying if in fact we were put in the position of the Minister of Defense, for instance, of Armenia, would we have considered a much more aggressive attack. Now, that leads to a lot of discussion, certainly among diplomats, because, and some of that relates to, do you bring the war closer to the Azeris so that the Azeris hurt? That's a terrible statement, and I'm a big, any general, any armed man or woman who served in the armed forces around the world is, at the end of the day, a person, a man or woman of peace. But you don't win conflicts unless you strike at what we call the center of gravity within a country that is proposing to wipe you out.